From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The last thing Canadians expect is for me to come down and lecture another country on how they choose to govern themselves.
As Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau meets Donald Trump at the White House, we speak to a leading Canadian Indigenous activist who fears the two leaders are on the same page for building more oil pipelines despite their political differences. Then, as a growing number of people are arrested in immigration raids, we speak to two New York immigrant rights organizers who fear their days in the United States are numbered.
I have a criminal record. I'm a non-citizen. They're going to come for me, and I might be lost.
And we look at the new head of the FCC and Republican efforts to kill net neutrality. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, has resigned following revelations he spoke with the Russian ambassador about U.S. sanctions during a late December phone call. Flynn now says he misinformed Vice President Mike Pence and top White House officials about contents of the call. The phone call was on December 29th, the same day President Obama imposed sanctions against Russia and expelled diplomats in retaliation for the alleged Russian hacking of the U.S. election. Lieutenant General Flynn has claimed the phone call involved only small talk, but U.S. officials who reviewed a transcript of a wiretap of the conversation say Flynn discussed the sanctions, a move that violates a 1799 U.S. law, the Logan Act, which prohibits unauthorized people from negotiating with a foreign government. Donald Trump was not president at the time. The Washington Post reports former acting Attorney General Sally Q. Yates had warned Trump's administration weeks ago that Flynn might be lying about the call. Last month, Trump ousted Yates after she refused to defend his Muslim ban. On Monday, the Washington Post reported the Justice Department had warned the White House that Flynn's call and his lies made him a blackmail risk. His resignation Monday came after a tumultuous few days in which Flynn increasingly lost support from Trump and key White House officials, even as members of Trump's inner circle publicly contradicted each other about Flynn's fate. On Monday, counselor to the president Kellyanne Conway went on MSNBC to say Flynn had the full confidence of the president. 1 hour later, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer told reporters Trump was, quote, evaluating the situation. On Monday night, Trump accepted Flynn's resignation and appointed retired Army Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg to be the acting national security advisor. Many are now asking what, if anything, Trump himself knew about Flynn's conversation. Longtime New York Times reporter and editor Jim Roberts tweeted Monday, quote, "There's still a huge question hanging. Did Trump or Bannon know that Flynn was discussing sanctions with the Russian ambassador?" unquote. Some are even calling for impeachment hearings. Flynn has been one of Trump's most criticized and controversial picks for top positions. He's well known for his anti-Muslim worldview, having called Islam a cancer and saying fear of Muslims is rational. His son, also named Michael Flynn, was fired as a member of Trump's transition team after he shared fake news pushed by right-wing websites. Among the conspiracy theories he pushed is one claiming Hillary Clinton and other prominent Democrats were running a child sex ring from the back of a Washington, D.C. pizza restaurant. The Trump administration is also facing criticism for its very public handling of the North Korea ballistic missile launch. The news of the launch broke on Saturday night as Trump and other White House officials were dining in the restaurant at the Trump-owned Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, where Trump was hosting Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for the weekend. As Trump and top officials moved to coordinate the United States response, other Mar-a-Lago diners gawked at the scene, including diner Richard D'Agazio, a Trump supporter who posted a series of photos on Facebook, along with the comments, quote, "Holy moly, it was fascinating to watch the flurry of activity at dinner when the news came that North Korea had launched a missile in the direction of Japan. Wow, the center of the action," unquote, he tweeted. Or he wrote. The display of dealing with classified information in public drew fire from both Senate and Democrats. Senate Democrats and Republicans, including Arizona Republican Senator John McCain, Rhode Island Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and New Mexico Democratic Senator Tom Udall said, quote, "This is America's foreign policy, not this week's episode of Saturday Night Live. We urge our Republican colleagues to start taking this administration's rash and unprofessional conduct seriously before there are consequences we all regret," unquote. On Monday, the UN Security Council condemned North Korea for the missile test, which is a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. On Capitol Hill, the Senate has voted 53 to 47 to confirm Steven Mnuchin to be the Treasury Secretary. Mnuchin's a former Goldman Sachs executive who has faced widespread criticism about his bank, One West, which has been called a foreclosure machine. Under Mnuchin's ownership, the bank foreclosed on 36,000 families, particularly elderly residents trapped in reverse mortgages. It was also accused of racially discriminatory lending practices. On Monday, Oregon Democratic Senator Ron Wyden criticized Mnuchin's role in the housing crisis.
A lot of people in those communities cast their votes in November based on a Trump message that real change was coming. Heads are going to be spinning tonight at the news from the Senate. In just a few minutes, this body will vote to confirm as Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, known by many as the foreclosure king.
Mnuchin is one of at least 6 Trump top advisors and cabinet nominees who are tied to Goldman Sachs. That list also includes National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn, Trump Chief Strategist Stephen Bannon, Securities and Exchange Commission Chair nominee Jay Clayton, Senior White House Advisor Anthony Scaramucci, and Senior Counselor for Economic Initiatives Dina Habib Powell. During his bruising confirmation hearings, Mnuchin also faced criticism for not initially disclosing about $100 million in assets. Fortune magazine recently reviewed financial disclosures by Mnuchin and reported he's as much as 10 times richer than previously thought, worth as much as $400 million. Hundreds of fast food workers rallied in multiple cities Monday to demand fast food mogul Andrew Puzder withdraw his nomination for Labor Secretary. In Anaheim, California, hundreds of fast food workers and their supporters marched on the corporate offices of Puzder's CKE Restaurants, the company that franchises the fast food outlets Hardee's and Carl's Jr. In St. Louis, Missouri, hundreds flooded into the lobby of Hardee's corporate headquarters to protest Puzder. Workers also rallied at Hardee's and Carl's Jr. outlets in Austin, Texas, St. Paul, Minnesota, and other cities. The nationwide protest came as 4 Republican senators said they will not support Puzder's nomination, threatening to derail his confirmation vote. The Washington Post reports Republican Senators Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Tim Scott of South Carolina, and Johnny Isakson of Georgia say they may oppose Puzder. Puzder's confirmation hearing is scheduled for Thursday after being delayed 4 times. He's facing increasing criticism for reports of widespread sexual harassment at his chain restaurants, as well as labor and safety violations. He's also under fire for allegations of domestic violence against his ex-wife, who even appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show in disguise in 1990 to speak about being abused. Politico reports senators have now viewed that March 1990 episode, which was titled High-Class Battered Women, after the Oprah Winfrey Network turned over a tape of the show to lawmakers. Puzder's ex-wife has since retracted the accusations of abuse in a child custody case. In more news on Trump's cabinet nominations, the Senate has unanimously confirmed David Shulkin to be head of the Veterans Administration. Shulkin, a physician, served as VA Undersecretary during the Obama administration. He's the first head of the Department of Veterans Affairs to have never served in the military. President Trump's Muslim travel ban has received 2 more legal blows. On Monday, U.S. District Court Judge Leonie Brinkema in Virginia granted a preliminary injunction against the executive order being enforced against Virginia residents or anyone who either works or studies at Virginia public universities. In her ruling, the judge wrote, quote, "Maximum power does not mean absolute power," unquote. Also on Monday, Seattle U.S. District Judge Robart ruled the lawsuit against the travel ban should proceed quickly in lower court, a decision that ruled against the Justice Department, which wanted the case to be put on hold. Robart was the federal judge who first ordered a nationwide suspension of Trump's travel ban, sparking a Twitter rant from the president, who called Robart a so-called judge. Last week, a federal appeals court in San Francisco unanimously upheld the nationwide suspension of Trump's executive order, which sought to temporarily bar all refugees and citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States. Resistance to the Muslim travel ban, as well as Trump's crackdown against immigration and immigrants currently living in the United States, continues nationwide. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, tens of thousands of people marched Monday for a day without Latinos, immigrants, and refugees. The massive march was called to oppose Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark's plan to cooperate with Trump's deportation plans and allow his deputies to be used as immigration agents. Sheriff Clark sparked controversy with a speech at the Republican National Convention when he celebrated the acquittal of a police officer charged in the case of Freddie Gray, who died from injuries sustained in police custody in Baltimore. Monday's march in Milwaukee is the latest in a series of mass demonstrations since Trump's inauguration, which also include a massive march in Raleigh, North Carolina Saturday. An estimated 20,000 people flooded into the streets for the North Carolina NAACP's annual Moral March on Raleigh to demonstrate against President Trump and North Carolina's anti-LGBT legislation, HB 2, also known as the bathroom bill, which denies transgender people the use of the bathroom, changing room, or locker room that matches their gender identity. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he deeply regrets the U.S.'s decision to block former Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad from serving as the next UN Special Representative to Libya. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley blocked his appointment Friday, claiming the UN has been biased in favor of the Palestinian Authority and that the move was intended to show U.S. support for Israel. This is UN Secretary General Guterres.
I believe he is the right person for the right job at the right moment. He has qualities that are recognized everywhere. He has a competence that nobody denies. And Libya requires the kind of capacity that he has. And I think it's a loss for the Libyan peace process and for the Libyan people that I'm not able to appoint him.
In Pakistan, a suicide attack targeting a protest in Lahore killed at least 13 people Tuesday. Jamaat-ur-Ahrar, a breakaway faction of the Pakistani Taliban, claimed responsibility for the attack, which also wounded more than 80 people. It struck a rally of hundreds of pharmacists and drug manufacturers who were protesting against government regulations of drugs. This is Lahore resident Hassan Babur.
There was peace and tranquility in Lahore recently, but yesterday's incident once again shook people's hearts. It showed that these things, incidents of terrorism, have started taking place once again.
And a former black liberation activist who spent 35 years in prison, 27 on death row, is free. Zolo Azania was convicted of killing a police officer during a 1981 bank robbery in Indiana. At his trial, he was an outspoken member of the Republic of New Africa and maintained his innocence. An all-white jury sentenced him to death, but the state Supreme Court twice overturned his death sentence. He was later given a 74-year sentence and was released early last week after earning credit for good behavior.
I got out of prison. I was released February the 6th, which was a Monday, and my whole life changed. The whole world, the air even smelled different. I want to thank everyone who supported me over the years. Everyone who has supported me and offered me their assistance and their sympathies and condolences, and for the people that I've lost, the people who didn't make it. I've seen a lot of people get executed.
That was Zolo Azania. His supporters have set up a GoFundMe page to help the 62-year-old, quote, rebuild his life as he looks for employment and continues his activism. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited the White House Monday for the first time since Donald Trump took office. In a joint news conference, Trump and Trudeau discussed trade, national security, and immigration policy. Trudeau said the two had a, quote, strong and fruitful conversation about immigration and security issues on which they have disagreed.
There have been times where we have differed in our approaches, and that's always been done firmly and respectfully. The last thing Canadians expect is for me to come down and lecture another country on how they choose to govern themselves. My role and our responsibility is to continue to govern in such a way that reflects Canadians' approach and be a positive example in the world.
During Trudeau's visit, Donald Trump reiterated his pledge to renegotiate NAFTA.
A very outstanding trade relationship with Canada. We'll be tweaking it. We'll be doing certain things that are going to benefit both of our countries. It's a much less severe situation than what's taken place on the southern border. On the southern border, for many, many years, the transaction was not fair to the United States. It was an extremely unfair transaction. We're going to work with Mexico. We're going to make it a fair deal for both parties. I think that we're going to get along very well with Mexico. They understand and we understand.
Trudeau's visit to the White House comes as he faces several challenges at home. A growing number of asylum seekers are braving freezing temperatures in an attempt to reach Canada through the border between North Dakota and Manitoba. Several refugees have suffered frostbite after trekking for hours in sub-zero weather, and aid organizations are overwhelmed. Many of those seeking refuge in Canada come from one of the 7 countries targeted by Donald Trump's anti-immigration executive order. They say they are worried about being deported if they remain in the United States.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has also come under fire by environmental activists for approving 2 major pipelines, the Kinder Morgan $5 billion Trans Mountain Pipeline and the $7.5 billion Enbridge Line 3 pipeline. The Trans Mountain Pipeline would carry oil from the Alberta tar sands to a port in Vancouver. The Enbridge Line 3 pipeline would carry tar sands oil from Alberta across the U.S.-Canadian border to a terminal in Superior, Wisconsin. Both pipelines face massive resistance from Canadian First Nations. For more, we're going to Clayton Thomas Mueller, a leading organizer and writer on environmental justice and Indigenous rights. He's a campaigner at 350.org and a member of the Matthias Colomb Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, Canada. We welcome you to Democracy Now!, Clayton. Can you talk about the significance of this meeting, of your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, coming down to Washington to meet with and hold a joint news conference with President Donald Trump?
Certainly. I think that, this visit and all the eyes on this visit put incredible pressure on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Many of us representing social movements here in Canada continue to be baffled by the, to the right of Justin Trudeau and his administration, in particular the departure from their commitments at the Paris Climate Summit to a 1.5-degree target, in line with the call to action from small island states whose countries are literally disappearing under our rising seas, through approving 2 massive tar sands projects that you just described, and also committing to work with the racist, misogynist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, Native American hating President Donald Trump on the Keystone XL pipeline, a pipeline that the former president rejected in the name of climate due to pressure from social movements. So, I think that this trip, was an opportunity for Justin Trudeau to, be a hero, to stand up in the face of all of the, shock doctrine-esque policy announcements that Donald Trump has been making since he's become president through executive order, and to take a firm line, to be a real climate leader, and to not partner with the United States on the Keystone XL pipeline. So, it continues to be a very disturbing thing. And there's a number of other issues as well. When we look at the women's advocacy program for the 1%, Justin Trudeau continues to, call himself a feminist, yet, does not call out the United States, having just called a sitting member of the Senate Pocahontas. Justin Trudeau, in the election trail, said that First Nations were the most important relationship with the federal government of Canada, and for him to not take a stand and call out the president over this obvious and blatant sexism and racism just adds to the pile of disturbingness of the whole visit.
Well, Clayton, you mentioned the XL pipeline at a news conference last month. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau welcomed the decision by Donald Trump to move ahead on the Keystone XL pipeline project. This is what he said.
In both the conversations I've had with President Trump now, Keystone XL came up as a topic, and I reiterated my support for the project. I've been on the record for many years supporting it because it leads to economic growth and good jobs for Albertans. This is about the responsible approach on growing the economy and creating good jobs for Canadians while we protect the environment for now and for future generations. This is what Canadians expect of us.
And what about this comment, especially in view of the fact that many people expected with his election that he would bring a much more forward-thinking administration in Canada after years of conservative leadership there?
Look, Canadians expect Justin Trudeau to be a hero. On the election trail, Justin Trudeau committed to ratifying the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. He committed to being a champion for the rights of women. He committed to being a champion for the sacredness of Mother Earth through adopting climate change policies this side of the border. All of these promises that Justin Trudeau has made, he has broken. And, for us, one of the things that we will continue to draw parallels between, of course, is that this government, the Trudeau government, has prepared itself for a Standing Rock level of resistance to its controversial approval of tar sands pipelines this side of the border. For us, Donald Trump, and the role that his administration has played in exacerbating the circumstances in Standing Rock, one can only assume that that the two are more alike than we would like them to be. And for us, who are involved in social movements resisting the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure, whether it's DAPL, Kinder Morgan on this side of the border, or this transboundary pipeline, Keystone XL, social movements will continue to organize in nonviolent and beautiful ways against both administrations until we get to some kind of climate sanity that takes us off of dirty fossil fuel economy.
Clayton Thomas Mueller, you've been a presence at Standing Rock, at the resistance camps, and Canadian First Nations have been heavily represented there, joining together with Native Americans from Latin America and the United States as well. What are your thoughts directly on President Trump moving forward, giving the okay for the Dakota Access Pipeline? The easement has been granted, and the reports that we have is that Energy Transfer Partners, the Dakota Access Pipeline, on which the Department of Energy Secretary Rick Perry sat on its board after he was governor of Texas. What are your thoughts on the construction crews moving forward to drill under the Missouri River right now?
Well, prayers of solidarity to all the frontline water protectors in Standing Rock. Now more than ever, social movements, the environmental movement, the women's rights movement, the LGBTQ movement, Black Lives Matter. This is a call out to all social movements to stand in solidarity with Standing Rock against the obvious conflict of interest that this administration has with Energy Transfers in making this decision to approve the easement. There has been a call to support people on the front line, and there has been a call for citizens to take action all across the lower 48 United States and across Mother Earth as well. So certainly First Nations in Canada will continue to be organizing in solidarity with them as we mount our own nonviolent offensive against the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Line 3 Enbridge Pipeline, and TransCanada's Energy East Pipeline here in Canada.
I wanted to ask you about another issue that came up in the visit of Justin Trudeau, the issue of trade. During Monday's appearance at the White House, Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau stressed that he planned to work with the U.S. on trade. This is what he said.
Canadians are rightly aware of the fact that much of our economy depends on good working relationships with the United States, good integration with the American economy. And the fact is, millions of good jobs on both sides of the border depend on the smooth and easy flow of goods and services and people back and forth across our border. Both President Trump and I got elected on commitments to support the middle class, to work hard for people who need a real shot at success. And we know that by working together, by ensuring the continued effective integration of our two economies, we are going to be creating greater opportunities for middle-class Canadians and Americans now and well into the future.
And meanwhile, Donald Trump says he's looking at tweaking portions of the North American Free Trade Agreement that deals with trade between the U.S. and Canada. Now, obviously, during the campaign, he was talking about more than tweaking. He was talking about renegotiating the entire deal. And obviously, for Canada, that means a big issue because about 70% of Canada's trade is with the United States.
Well, I think that, trade is an excellent example how much like the United States, Canada's economy and its economic success is fundamentally based on the dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their lands to provide open-door access to extractive companies to take the resources from said land and to sell in the international market to the highest bidder. Trudeau reopening NAFTA with Donald Trump, just makes me think of the bilateral free trade agreement that they're negotiating with China, FIPA, and as well as with the European Union, CETA. These trade agreements put incredible pressure on Indigenous communities here in Canada, where the majority of natural resources are being extracted, and done so without consulting with these rights-holding nations within Canada, the settler colonial state. So it's highly problematic that this conversation is happening in a vacuum from First Nations governments, which is one of the orders of government here in Canada. Certainly social movements are watching, this discussion around reopening of NAFTA with a heavy lens on Indigenous sovereignty.
Clayton, you're speaking to us from Manitoba, where many refugees have been braving freezing temperatures and trekking through deep snow in an attempt to reach Canada from North Dakota. There are reports of at least 2 men who lost all their fingers to frostbite after a 10-hour journey across the border. This is Omar Jamal of the Somali community of Minnesota.
They're doing it. They think it's worth the risk. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. Canadian government will take some urgent steps to address these people's plight and concern and very serious issue. I hope we can get their attention to do something about this, not watch people suffer.
That was Omar Jamal of the Somali community of Minnesota. Your response to immigrants leaving the United States and going over the border and what he's describing he faces, Clayton?
Well, I think, there's been many disturbing stories about migrants coming across the border in search of a better life and in search of freedom from Donald Trump's tyranny and the oppressive ICE raids that are taking place and wreaking terror across communities in the United States. Justin Trudeau, being like any politician, has used this opportunity to, get some points in the media by saying that our doors are open. But we know that it's just, not that black and white. I think that for us, in the climate justice movement, we understand that within our lifetimes, we will see the migration issue, grow into the hundreds of millions, because of catastrophic climate destabilization and violent, unpredictable climate weather-related events. And these problems are only going to compound. Again, another reason why I think that Trudeau has missed the mark in saying that Canadians don't want him to set a good example in how we deal with a regime in the United States that is blatantly white supremacist, blatantly Islamophobic, blatantly against working in a good way with its local Indigenous population. Justin Trudeau can do better.
As we begin to wrap up, there was a very interesting question asked by a Canadian journalist to Trudeau and Trump. She said, President Trump, you seem to suggest that Syrian refugees are a Trojan horse for potential terrorism, while the Prime Minister hugs refugees and welcomes them with open arms. So I'd like to know, are you confident the northern border is secure? Clayton Thomas Mueller, your response. As President Trump talks about building a wall on the southern border, she's saying, what are you going to do about the northern border if we accept refugees and you call them terrorists and they're coming into the United States?
Look, I think Canada is no different than any other country in the world dealing with radicalism. You know, we just had a radical Christian fundamentalist terrorist attack in Quebec City against a mosque just the other day. The Trump administration, Sean Spicer, quoted it as being a suspect of Moroccan descent, when really the reality of it was that it was white Christian fundamentalism responsible for this terror attack. I think that, you know, Canada, just like any other country in the world, has its own challenges to deal with as far as security. However, I think that exacerbating tensions in the Middle East, you know, perpetuating hatred against Islam, you know, these are all textbook ways of how not to address the problem of radicalism, may it be Islamic, Christian, or Zionist, or any other form of it. That, you know, again, like I said, our Prime Minister, you know, has a chance to be a hero in the rise of tyranny, and he needs to do better, and Canadians expect him to do better. Certainly First Nations expect the most of him, you know, and how he conducts himself, especially on the Keystone XL pipeline and the issues in Standing Rock.
And finally, Clayton, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the attack in the mosque in Quebec. We've seen in many European countries the rise of right-wing populist movements, a lot of them anti-immigrant in nature. What is happening among Canadians? Is there are you seeing the rise of a populist right-wing movement in that country, which has always had a tolerant viewpoint toward immigration?
No, I think that, you know, 1 + 1 = 2. You know, the rise of fascism, the rise of Islamophobia and blatant white supremacy and patriarchy in the United States, in the President of the United States, has had a dramatic impact on emboldening racists here in Canada, emboldening, you know, radical white Christians here in Canada. You know, this is 1 and 1 make 2. And that's why, you know, for us, you know, we continue to hammer on the Prime Minister that, you know, on matters of climate denialism, on matters of xenophobia, you know, Canadians expect more of our government. And our government, you know, and Canada's international image has always been one of human rights defender, even when they haven't even done a good job at that. But, you know, they've always perpetuated that image. And I think that it's important that Justin Trudeau, you know, walk lightly as he moves forward and how deep he decides to get in bed with Donald Trump. Clayton
Thomas Mueller, we want to thank you for joining us, leading organizer and writer on environmental justice, Indigenous rights with the Stop It at the Source campaigner at 350.org. He's a member of the Matthias Colomb Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, Canada, Treaty 6 territory. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a story you may not hear very much about in the mainstream media because it's about the media and laws around the Internet. Stay with us. Boyfriend by Britta Person here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to look at President Donald Trump's newly appointed chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai, who has begun to attack net neutrality rules and other consumer protections. In a series of actions earlier this month, Pai blocked 9 companies from providing affordable high-speed internet to low-income families. He withdrew the FCC's support from an effort to curb the exorbitant cost of phone calls from prison, and he also said he disagrees with the 2015 decision to regulate the internet like a public utility.
For more, we're going to Los Angeles, where we'll speak with Jessica Gonzalez, Deputy Director, Senior Counsel at Free Press. Gonzalez was formerly on the FCC's Open Internet Advisory Committee and Diversity Committee. She's also the former Executive Vice President of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. Jessica Gonzalez, welcome to Democracy Now! Talk about the significance of the elevation of Ajit Pai to be the head of the FCC and the decisions and the stands that he takes.
Well, Ajit Pai is Trump's new FCC chairman, and it should come as a surprise to no one that he poses a significant threat, not only to net neutrality, but also to the digital divide. In his first week in office, he talked a good game about bridging the digital divide, but actions speak louder than words. And if you look at his actions, there's a very, very troubling history of voting against reforms to both bring affordable access to poor Americans, to low-income Americans, to people of color who disproportionately lack home internet access. But there's also a troubling history of voting against net neutrality. He voted against the Lifeline order to modernize Lifeline and bring affordable broadband to low-income families. He voted against the E-rate order to help bring high-speed internet to schools and libraries in poor neighborhoods. And he voted against net neutrality to keep the internet open so that people who don't usually get a spot in mainstream media can tell their own stories, can organize for justice, and can make a living. And so we're very concerned. We have a close eye on him, and we can't trust what he says. And actions speak louder than words.
Well, Jessica, in a 2015 interview with Reason TV, Ajit Pai suggested that any federal regulation of the internet is harmful. This is what he said.
Do you trust the federal government to make the internet ecosystem more vibrant than it is today? Can you think of any regulated utility like the electric company or water company that is as innovative as the internet? I mean, I think what Mark Andreessen, who developed, of course, the first Netscape browser, what he and other entrepreneurs are seeing is that this is something that has worked really well, and there's no reason for the FCC to mess it up by inserting itself into areas where it hasn't been before.
So what about this issue of his view of the internet? And remember, it took the Obama administration several years, only the last couple of years of Obama's presidency, before they finally took a clear stand that the internet was a public utility. And even under Wheeler, who no one expected as the chair of the FCC, a former telecommunications guy, that it would pass, it would take that stand. It has now. What would it mean if Pai got the FCC to vote to rescind that?
Well, it would be very dangerous. Look, we're in an administration that is trying to shut down speech. We have a president and his surrogates telling the media to shut up. They're trying to silence dissent. And the internet is the one clear way where we know that people, movements can control the narrative and can organize. 4 million Americans wrote to the FCC in 2015 and told them, we want an open internet. We understand that the internet companies have monopoly-like status, that they are blocking, that they have the power and the incentive to block access and to cut special deals behind our backs. And we don't want that. We want to be able, once we pay the hefty prices we do to get on the internet, we want to be able to go where we want, see what we want, and access the content we want without getting shoved over into a slow lane if you don't have the money. And so it's incredibly vital now more than ever that we protect an open internet and that this administration heed the millions and millions of regular people that, I think We cannot trust Ajit Pai. He's a former Verizon lobbyist. He's walking in the footsteps of Trump, and we need to be very, very, very careful.
I wanted to ask you about the troubling role of a lot of the civil rights organizations on this issue, the NAACP and others, and this minority media telecommunications organization. Could you talk about the disappointing role that some of these organizations have played in this debate?
Sure. Well, there's a few organizations that represent people of color that have come out on the wrong side of this issue. It's troubling, but frankly, if you look at the grassroots, the vast majority of people of color understand this. We understand that we do not like the way we have been represented in mainstream media. We're portrayed as criminals. We're portrayed as people who pose a danger to the society. We understand that the internet has played a democratizing force in making sure that our voices are heard, in making sure that we've been able to organize, and in making sure that we can really tap into the networks that we need to tap into to change the narrative in this country for the better of lots of different issues, for the water protectors, for immigrant rights activists, for Black Lives Matter. And we see the way that movements have utilized the internet to change the way society perceives us. And so these groups, there's a few of them, they're on the wrong side of the issue, and it's very troubling. But they don't represent most people of color.
I want to ask you about Ajit Pai's position on the FCC's attempts to prevent prison phone monopolies from dramatically overcharging families for phone calls to prisoners.
Sure. Well, this is yet another example of where he talks the talk, but he walks in the other direction. In both 2013 and 2015, the FCC looked at the issue of exorbitant prison phone rates. Some families of inmates and detainees are paying up to $17 for a 15-minute call. It's outrageous. The prisons are getting kickbacks from prison phone companies to charge these exorbitant rates, and it's a real abuse of power. Ajit Pai actually acknowledged that this was unjust and that the interests of inmates' families may not necessarily align with the prison phone companies. Yet he went ahead and voted against two different orders to help regulate the rates and the fees that are charged by these companies. And so he talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. In fact, he filed a 20-page dissent in 2013 that mirrored some of the company talking points. And so we have to really hold him accountable on this. He does not have the best interests of communities of color and poor people at heart, and we need to hold his feet to the fire.
And finally, I wanted to ask you, you were a member of the FCC's Open Internet Advisory Committee and Diversity Committee. Have those been dissolved, or what's happened? Because I understand you haven't been called to any meetings in quite a while.
It's been a couple of years since I've heard anything about those. They used to be active a few years back. We'd meet on a semi-regular basis. I don't think I've received an official word on whether or not they exist anymore, but I certainly haven't been invited to any meetings in the past couple of years.
Well, Jessica Gonzalez, I want to thank you for being with us, Deputy Director, Senior Counsel at Free Press, formerly with the FCC's Open Internet Advisory Committee and Diversity Committee. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, two leading immigrants' rights activists here in New York, in the face of the attempted imposition of the Muslim travel ban, but also the raids that have been taking place across the country. Stay with us.
Va pasando el trapo sobre la mesa y está cuidando que todo brille como una perla. Cuando llegue la patrona, que no se vuelva a quejar, no sea cosa que la acuse de ilegal. si atiende los jardines, parecen de Disneyland. Maneja una troca vieja sin la licencia. No importa si fue taxista allá en su tierra natal. Eso no importa para el tío Sal.
El Hielo, Ice by La Santa Cecilia, performing at our Democracy Now! Studio. To see the full interview and their performance, go to democracynow.org. Yes, this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, we turn now to the recent raids on immigrant communities across the United States. The Department of Homeland Security said Monday the number of immigrants arrested over the past week has risen to 680. Raids were reported in at least 11 states. They included the coastal states of California and New York, several southern states, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and a group of Midwestern states, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Missouri, and Wisconsin. Officials said of those arrested that 75% were, quote, criminal aliens. They described the raids as routine, but more people are being detained compared to periods of routine enforcement during the Obama administration. On Monday, President Trump said he was fulfilling a campaign promise.
I said we will get the criminals out, the drug lords, the gang members. We're getting them out. General Kelly, who's sitting right here, is doing a fantastic job. And I said at the beginning, we are going to get the bad ones, the really bad ones. We're getting them out, and that's exactly what we're doing. I think that in the end, everyone's going to be extremely happy.
Well, here in New York City, immigration agents arrested at least 40 people over the last week, even though it's a sanctuary city. Officials said 95% had criminal convictions. To talk more about who's being targeted, we're joined by two prominent immigrants' rights activists here in New York. Both of them are also immigrants whose criminal records put them at risk of deportation. Abraham Paulos is Executive Director of Families for Freedom, which includes many members whose lives have been affected by the intersection of the criminal justice system and immigration enforcement. Also with us, Ravi Ragbir. He's Executive Director of the New Sanctuary Coalition of New York City, an interfaith network that helps immigrant families stay together. Ravi faces deportation when he goes to his ICE check-in on March 9th. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Ravi, let's start with you. Tell us your story and why you face deportation in the next few weeks.
Well, like you said, I have a criminal conviction. This was back in 2000. I was convicted for fraud. Basically, what caused the collapse of the economy, and what Munchin is now being saying he's a foreclosure king. I end up working for one of those organizations, and just following their own rules, I was placed in criminal proceedings, convicted, and now because of that, I am facing deportation.
That was more than 15 years ago.
This was more than 15 years ago. I have a green card. My wife is a citizen. My daughter is a citizen. And, you know, it's even with that, it still doesn't change the fact that I'm in a high probability that I will be detained and deported.
And how long have you been in the country?
I've been in the country over 25 years.
And under the Obama administration, what was happening? Because you had the criminal conviction 15 years ago. How were they dealing with it, and what are your worries about the changes under Trump?
Well, under the Obama administration, I mean, things were still very difficult. We talked about this being a sanctuary city, and we're not going to go into that topic right now. But he himself has created this machinery, this beast, this monster, that all Trump has to do is release it, and he is releasing it. You asked me what has happened with my case under the Obama administration. Well, there were still certain rules and regulations that they sort of upheld. And one of which is while I'm still fighting my case in court, they did not deport me. And I still have my case in court, but under this administration, I'm not sure if that will hold any water.
And this new sanctuary coalition, my understanding is it was formed almost the day after the election in November? Or no? Okay, talk about the coalition then.
The coalition was formed in 2007 under the Bush administration when we were trying to, when they started this because they saw the impact it had on the immigrant community, and the faith community said, we like the old 1980s and the century of the civil rights and the Holocaust, they had to protect their members, their congregation. And they started in 2007. I took over in 2010. I'm sure you know of the Bring the Dream Home campaign. That's when I took over, and we mobilized and we built the sanctuary to protect our people of color immigrants. One of the things that you need to notice is that in 2009, when we started ICE Order Rikers, that's when the term sanctuary city started to come together, because we were the ones who initiated that non-detainer policy throughout in New York City, and which became a model throughout the country.
We just did a segment last week on Guadalupe Garcia de Reyes, who is in Texas, and she was in Arizona, and she was deported. She had to go to a check-in, and that's where they picked her up. She went to this check-in every year for 8 years, but this time they handcuffed her and they deported her almost immediately. You face that same kind of check-in. Is this going to deter people from showing up at check-ins? Are you going to show up at your check-in?
I am going to show up at my check-in, and it will deter people because they will be afraid that they will be handcuffed. I used to report 3 times a week in the beginning of when I was released from detention, 3 times a week with a curfew and many other restrictions on my freedom. But still, even though it will cause a lot of trauma and a lot of terror in us, a lot of us will still want to go to check-ins because we have no choice. We are caught between a beast and a shark, right? Where no matter where we are, we will be eaten alive. And if we don't go, we'll be targeted and we become a fugitive. We are already on the NCIC database, and as soon as we interact with any law enforcement, we will be arrested and taken away.
And Abraham Paulos, tell us your story. You're also worried about possible deportation as a result of your past history.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say worried. I'm not scared about all that. I mean, I think that I came here in 1981 from Sudan. I'm Eritrean. There was a war happening there. And I actually came to the United States to another war called the war on drugs, the war on crime, the war on poverty, particularly during the 90s, which that was the last time that immigration laws had actually passed in this country. The Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, and also the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act. So as much as there is a lot of worry around the priorities or what have you, I just really want to remind people that the laws haven't changed. And when they did change, it was under a Clinton administration that continues to grow. So George Bush, at his time of presidency, had also deported more people than any other president before, right? And then Obama, and we'll see how Donald Trump does. And so essentially, you know, in 2003, that I went for my citizenship, but because of my arrest, I was denied. But it was also a couple of weeks after the Department of Homeland Security was you know, sort of created. And so what you're seeing is this law enforcement agency, particularly Immigration Customs Enforcement, continuing to grow. It really started in the 80s and 90s. And so that's essentially my story. I mean, more recently, about 6-7 years ago, I got picked up in Brooklyn for a robbery that I physically couldn't have done, but NYPD, bang-up job they do in this city. And I ended up in Rikers, and it was in Rikers that I had found out that ICE had an office in Rikers, and that it was best that I leave, and that's where Families for Freedom found me.
And explain that and the battle that was waged around ICE being at Rikers, what that means, that you can have 2 people who committed or didn't commit a crime, because you can be at Rikers without even being convicted. Absolutely. One gets out and goes home. They serve the same amount of time there. The other one is picked up by ICE and taken away.
Absolutely. And this has been the main way that New Yorkers have been getting deported, right? And so New Yorkers have been getting deported by the plane loads, pardon the pun. And usually it was through a detainer. There was also another program called Secure Communities, which is a fingerprint sharing program that basically takes every citizen and checks them against an immigration database. If you get a so-called hit, a detainer comes out, which is essentially a hold that says anyone who's held as foreign-born or a non-citizen in Rikers will be held for immigration to come pick up and start their deportation process. I just also want to make clear that in New York, most New Yorkers who have gotten deported, their process has started with the NYPD.
So let's talk about that process starting with the NYPD. On Saturday, hundreds protested the New York Police Department's broken windows policing strategy of arresting people for low-level offenses, which can funnel them into this process that can result in deportation. This is Albert Saint-Jean, who is a Haitian-American fellow with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, who was addressing Mayor Bill de Blasio.
He has to get his house in order if he really wants a sanctuary city, a freedom city. You know, where we can feel free to walk around in our own communities without feeling like, you know, I did something wrong just for existing. Where we don't have to make, where little mistakes won't ruin the rest of our lives.
What about this issue of how the city administration, the police department is dealing with this issue? How was it under Mayor Bloomberg, and how has it changed, if at all, under Mayor de Blasio? Well,
I mean, under Mayor Bloomberg, Executive Order 42 was passed, and this was sort of an amendment for Executive Order 34. And essentially what it was just basically regulating city agencies and their data sharing or information sharing or collecting confidential information, which immigration status actually is. So under Bloomberg, I mean, really what you're starting to see is that the NYPD, I mean, New York City is just really becoming a police state, but the NYPD is growing and growing. I mean, last year we had 1,300 new police officers. The budget for the NYPD is around, what, $75 billion. The budget for education in New York City is around, what, $29 billion. And so what you're seeing is that, particularly under de Blasio, you're starting to see that no one's really standing up to the NYPD, and you can see this under the NYCID, in which the NYPD made sure that they wanted to be in the room so that they would accept this ID or not. And so I think that in general, we're seeing more of the same, and nothing has really changed.
But the city has said that the NYCID information is private information, right?
Well,
that's not going to be shared with law enforcement agencies.
That's not necessarily true, right? So the city says a lot of things, first of all, right? And at first, they said that they needed to collect the records or keep the records, but that's what NYPD said. And now they're saying they don't need to do it. But what probably will not be destroyed are people's names, addresses, and photos. Outside of that, what more do you need?
Well, I do want to address that because
Ravi,
the status does not show up on the municipal ID. So we use municipal ID as a tool to protect us in this space if there's an ICE raid or if the ICE is coming into this area. So the new way that they're using municipal ID is they're not taking any documents, keeping any documents, they're not even scanning anything. So moving forward, anyone who's getting municipal ID is safe through this process.
They should have never collected it in the first place. That's what I'm trying to say, Ravi. You know what I mean? Like, if they're going to say, oh, we need this, and the NYPD, you know, says we need this, and then all of a sudden you don't need it, that sounds like somebody made a mistake.
Can I ask you what sanctuary means to you?
Sanctuary means a number of things. You know, the original meaning of sanctuary is where the physical space is where you can seek refuge in. You have the Underground Railroad through the slave trade. You have the sanctuary through the Holocaust, which I mentioned earlier, where the building itself becomes sanctuary. But sanctuary is more than that right now. We are talking about sanctuary as being taken out of the churches, out of the houses of worship, into the streets, into the Federal Plaza, where we have our faith leaders going into immigration to work with them, to protect them, and stand up to the inhumanity that they're seeing. Because when they observe what is happening, they can speak to it firsthand, because they have seen what is happening and the inhumanity of what they're observing.
Talking about immigration, Abraham, you are affected not only by the immigrant roundups and the people that are dealing with this, but also the Muslim ban.
Well, I mean, yeah, I was born in an Islamic country. I mean, I think that, you know, this is about race, you know, just in general. I think we just really need to call it for what it is. We're living under white supremacy, and we've been living under white supremacy for hundreds of years. Like, Donald Trump is not the first white supremacist to sort of be president. We had 43 before, and some of them owned slaves. And so I think that...
We have 10 seconds. You're wearing a T-shirt that says deportee. Do you expect to be deported?
I don't, you know, I'm not afraid. I just want to put that out there, and I don't think that our communities should be afraid of this, because this is, you know, a situation in which we've been dealing with for a long time.
I want to thank you both for being with us. Abraham Paulos is a head of Families for Freedom, and Ravi Ragbir is with the head of the New Sanctuary Coalition of New York City, who faces deportation when he goes for his ICE check-in March 9th. We will follow his story. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.